The rain had been falling since dawn, turning the gravel before Wren House into a mirror of black stone and trembling silver. Inside, beneath chandeliers, Lady Clara Wren stood perfectly still while her family discussed the most private sorrow of her life as though it were a defect in the family silver. "You have been married 7 years, her mother said, her voice carefully measured. 7 years, Clara." Clara lowered her eyes to the untouched porcelain before her. The tea had gone cold. Her father sat at the head of the table, fingers resting upon a sealed letter. He did not look at her. "The physicians have said enough," he murmured. "There is no reasonable expectation." The words were gentle only in grammar. Across the table, Clara's elder sister shifted uncomfortably. Her husband stared into his wine. An aunt whispered something behind a lace fan, and Clara did not need to hear it. She had heard it for years. Barren. The word had followed her from drawing rooms to church pews, from whispered consultations to the sympathetic smiles of women who had never known what it meant to wait every month with a foolish, trembling hope. Clara had once believed marriage would protect her from such cruelty. Instead, it had given society another reason to inspect her. Her husband had died 2 years earlier, leaving no child behind. Now even death could not spare her from judgment. Her mother reached across the table and touched the pearls at Clara's throat. They had belonged to Clara's grandmother. "You cannot remain here indefinitely," she said. Clara looked up. "Remain?" Her father finally met her eyes. His expression was stern, but something uncertain moved beneath it. "Your sister has children. The family must think of its future. Your presence invites uncomfortable questions." Clara understood then. They were not merely asking her to leave the house for a while. They were erasing her. Her mother unclasped the pearl necklace. The tiny click of the fastening sounded louder than the rain. "These should remain with the family," she whispered. Clara's fingers curled beneath the table, but she did not protest. "If my absence will restore everyone's comfort," she said quietly, "I shall make it easy for you." Her father pushed the sealed letter toward her. Inside was a modest allowance and an address belonging to a distant aunt she scarcely knew. "You may leave this evening." Clara rose. For one trembling second, she thought someone might stop her. No one did. She climbed the staircase to her room, where the walls still held portraits of ancestors who had never been asked whether they deserved their place. Clara packed one traveling case. A dark green dress. 2 books. A small silver locket. The wedding ring she had never removed. At the mirror, she paused. Her face looked older than 27. Not ugly. Not broken. Only tired. She touched her reflection and whispered, "I was never a failure." It was the first time she had said it aloud. By dusk, the carriage waited beneath the dripping branches. Clara descended the steps carrying her own case. As she crossed the drive, another carriage approached through the rain. Black lacquer. Silver crest. 4 powerful horses. It stopped beside her. A tall man stepped down. Alexander Ashford, Duke of Ravensmere. Clara knew him by reputation. 38, widowed, immensely wealthy, and father to 5 children. London called him cold because he rarely smiled. Some called him arrogant because he never explained himself. Others called him tragic because, after his wife's death, he had withdrawn from society almost completely. His gaze settled on Clara, then moved to the single case in her hand. He looked toward Wren House. Then back at her. "You are leaving." It was not a question. Clara straightened. "Yes, Your Grace." His eyes briefly caught the bare place at her throat where the pearls had been. "I witnessed enough to understand why." A flush of humiliation rose beneath her skin. "Then I beg you to forget what you witnessed." Alexander's expression changed. "Some things ought not be forgotten." She expected pity. There was none. Instead, his voice became quieter. "A woman's worth cannot be measured by the cradle she fills, Lady Clara." Clara stared at him. No one had ever said those words to her. Alexander opened the carriage door. "I have a proposal." She almost laughed. "Surely you cannot mean marriage." "I do." The answer struck harder than any insult. Clara stepped back. "You do not know me." "No," he replied. "But I know what it is to watch a family break under the weight of grief." His gaze darkened. "My 5 children have lost their mother. I have spent years trying to give them everything except what they actually need." "And what is that?" He looked toward Ravensmere's distant road, where mist gathered like smoke. "Someone who understands what it means to be unwanted." Clara's breath caught. He was not offering rescue. He was asking her to enter a house filled with 5 grieving hearts and 1 guarded duke. Yet there was something in his eyes she could not name. Alexander extended his hand. For the first time that day, Clara felt not rescued, but seen, and the difference frightened her more than rejection ever had. Come to Ravensmere, Lady Clara. Not as a governess. Not as charity. Come as the woman I intend to make my Duchess. Clara looked back at the house that had cast her out. Then at the stranger offering her a future she had never imagined. She had spent 7 years being told that her empty cradle made her less of a woman. Now, without knowing why, the Duke with 5 heirs was asking her to become the center of a family that already had everything she had supposedly failed to provide. Clara placed her hand in his. And somewhere behind the rain-dark windows of Wren House, the family that had declared her worthless watched the Duke's carriage carry her away. Ravensmere Hall rose from the morning mist like a stern old kingdom, its dark stone towers crowned with slate and ivy. Clara watched it through the carriage window, wondering whether she had exchanged one prison for another. Yet when the great doors opened, she felt no dread equal to the dread she had carried from Wren House. There, she had been unwanted because she could not give life. Here, she had been invited precisely because the Duke believed she might understand life's wounds. Alexander met her beneath the vaulted entrance. He wore black from throat to boot, his broad shoulders severe beneath a perfectly tailored coat. Behind him stood 5 children, arranged with the awkward dignity of soldiers forced into formation. The eldest, Edmund, was 17 and already possessed the grave expression of a man twice his age. Arthur, 14, watched Clara with undisguised suspicion. Thomas, 11, hid one hand behind his back and examined her as though she were a puzzle. Henry, 9, stood close to his brother. Rose, the youngest, was 7, small and solemn, with a faded blue ribbon tied around her wrist. "These are my children," Alexander said. Clara inclined her head. "Then I am honored to meet them." Arthur's mouth tightened. "You are the new Duchess." "No," Clara answered softly. "Not yet." The boy seemed disappointed that she had not been offended. Alexander glanced at him, but Clara shook her head almost imperceptibly. She understood defiance. She had lived inside it for years. That evening, dinner was painfully formal. Silver gleamed beneath candlelight, crystal trembled whenever someone moved a glass, and 5 young faces remained guarded across the long table. Alexander spoke little. Clara noticed that he watched the children more often than he watched his plate. Edmund carved his meat without appetite. Arthur deliberately ignored every servant. Thomas kept glancing toward the empty chair beside his father. Henry refused dessert. Rose never lifted her eyes. Clara finally understood that the Duke had not exaggerated their grief. After dinner, Alexander escorted her toward the drawing room. "I owe you an explanation." "I believe you owe me several." A faint smile touched his mouth. "You are less timid than you appear." "I have been called many things, Your Grace. Timid was never among them." His expression softened. "The children believe every woman who enters this house intends to replace their mother." "And do you?" "No." "Then we understand one another." Before he could answer, a sharp crash echoed from the nursery corridor. They found Arthur beside a shattered vase. He stared defiantly at Clara. "I did not do it." Clara looked at the broken porcelain. "I did not ask whether you did." Arthur blinked. She crouched carefully and began gathering the larger pieces. "Then why are you cleaning it?" "Because broken things become dangerous when everyone leaves them scattered." For the first time, the boy had no reply. Alexander watched from the doorway, strangely silent. Over the following days, Clara made no attempt to command the children. She did not demand affection, impose lessons, or speak of becoming their mother. Instead, she listened. She discovered that Edmund practiced fencing alone because he believed his father saw only a future duke when he looked at him. Arthur kept old letters from his mother beneath his mattress. Thomas woke screaming from nightmares but pretended afterward that he had slept peacefully. Henry had stopped entering the music room because his mother once played there every afternoon. Rose simply watched Clara. Then, one cold afternoon, Rose followed her into the conservatory. Sunlight poured through dusty glass, touching dead vines and empty flower pots. "My mother liked roses," Rose whispered. "So do I." Rose studied her. "Are you going to take her place?" Clara knelt beside her. "No one could." The child's eyes filled with tears. "Papa says you are kind." Clara looked toward the tall windows. "Your papa is very generous." Rose slowly untied the blue ribbon from her wrist. "My mother gave me this." Clara hesitated. "Then you should keep it." I want you to have it. Clara accepted the ribbon with both hands. That tiny gift affected her more deeply than any jewel ever had. She wore it that evening. The gesture did not go unnoticed. At dinner, Lady Beatrice Ashford, Alexander's widowed aunt and the household's unofficial ruler, stared at the ribbon. That belonged to the late Duchess. I know, Clara replied. Beatrice smiled without warmth. How touching. You have been here scarcely a week, yet already you are collecting relics. Alexander's eyes hardened. Enough, Beatrice. But the damage had been done. By morning, whispers had begun among the servants. By afternoon, a London newspaper carried a cruel little paragraph suggesting that the Barren Lady Clara had ensnared the widowed Duke by winning his motherless children. At the next charity ball, the rumor became an insult. A countess approached Clara beneath a chandelier blazing with candlelight. I had heard Ravensmere possessed 5 heirs, she said sweetly. I wondered why the Duke would risk marrying a woman unable to provide another. The surrounding ladies fell silent. Clara felt the old humiliation return, cold and familiar. Before she could answer, Alexander stepped beside her. He removed an antique brooch bearing the Ravensmere crest from his coat and pinned it carefully against her gown. Then he faced the watching crowd. My Duchess, he said, his voice carrying across the ballroom, will never again be discussed as though her value depends upon what she can produce. Silence fell. Clara looked at him, stunned. But across the room, Beatrice had gone pale. Later that night, while Clara returned to her chamber, she noticed an envelope lying beneath her door. It contained a copy of one of the children's inheritance papers. A single clause had been altered. Someone had been quietly changing the legal future of the 5 heirs. And suddenly Clara understood that the cruel rumors surrounding her were not merely gossip. They were a distraction. Someone wanted her gone from the beginning. The envelope remained beneath Clara's pillow until midnight. She had read the altered inheritance clause so many times that the words seemed burned into her mind. The original provision granted Edmund, Arthur, Thomas, Henry, and Rose equal protection beneath the Ravensmere Trust. The new document shifted authority toward a single trustee, leaving the children vulnerable to decisions made without their father's consent. That trustee was Lady Beatrice. Clara did not sleep. At breakfast, she watched Beatrice pour cream into her coffee with immaculate calm, as though she had never touched the future of 5 children. Did you rest well, Lady Clara? Beatrice asked. Not particularly. How unfortunate. Their eyes met. For one suspended moment, Clara saw something beneath the older woman's polished expression, calculation. Then Beatrice smiled and turned away. Alexander entered shortly afterward, carrying correspondence from London. His face was stern, but his gaze softened when it found Clara. I received another letter concerning the newspaper scandal. So quickly? They are enjoying themselves. Clara lowered her voice. There is something more important than gossip. She showed him the document. Alexander read it once. Then again. The color drained from his face. This cannot be genuine. It bears your seal. I never signed this. Clara studied him carefully. Then someone used your authority. Alexander folded the paper. Where did you find it? Under my door. His expression sharpened. Why did you not bring this to me immediately? Because I needed to know whether I could trust you first. The answer struck him. He looked at her for several seconds, then nodded. That is fair. There was no anger in his voice. Only disappointment that she had ever needed to ask. That evening, Alexander invited Clara into the old conservatory. Rain whispered against the glass roof. Dead roses curled around the iron arches, and moonlight lay across the tiled floor like pale silk. I owe you another truth, he said. Clara stood beside a cold marble fountain. I suspect there are several. His mouth almost curved. My wife died 6 years ago. I know. No. You know the date. You do not know what followed. He looked toward the darkened garden. After her death, the children stopped being children. Edmund became responsible. Arthur became angry. Thomas became frightened. Henry became silent. Rose stopped sleeping. Clara listened without interrupting. And I, Alexander continued, became a duke before I allowed myself to remain their father. The confession carried no self-pity. That made it more painful. I thought discipline would save them, he said. I thought if the house remained orderly, grief would eventually obey. Grief obeys no one. Alexander looked at her. You understand that? Clara's fingers tightened around her sleeve. My family taught me that sorrow is acceptable only when it remains invisible. He stepped closer. Your family was wrong. The words were simple. Yet Clara felt them like warmth reaching frozen hands. She turned away. I was married 7 years, she whispered. Every month, I hoped. Every month, I learned to be ashamed of hoping. Alexander said nothing. So she continued. People think barrenness is merely the absence of a child. They do not understand how society turns it into an accusation, as though a woman has committed some silent crime. Alexander's voice became quiet. You were never lacking a child. They were lacking the imagination to see you. Clara closed her eyes. Alexander placed the letter upon the table. Clara, he said, if this is genuine, you must leave Ravensmere. She stared at him. Because Beatrice may be dangerous. Because you may become her next target. Clara shook her head. I have already been sent away because someone decided my existence was inconvenient. I will not allow another person to make that decision for me. This is not pride. No, she answered. It is time I have had something worth protecting. Yourself. She glanced toward Edmund. The children. He reached for her hand, then stopped before touching it. That hesitation told Clara more than any declaration could. He wanted to stay near her. He was afraid of what that desire might cost them. For the first time since leaving Wren House, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps she had not been defective after all. When she opened her eyes, Alexander was still watching her. There was something dangerous in that silence. Not scandal. Not obligation. Tenderness. She stepped back. You must not look at me like that. Why? Because I might begin to believe your kindness is something more. His expression changed. What if it is? Her breath caught. Neither moved. Then footsteps sounded beyond the conservatory doors. The moment vanished. It was Edmund. His face was pale. Father, I found something. He handed Alexander a bundle of letters tied with faded blue thread. My mother wrote these, he said. I found them hidden behind the panel in her old study. Alexander stared at the handwriting. His hands trembled. Clara noticed immediately. One letter was addressed simply, Alexander. He opened it. The first lines changed his expression from grief to disbelief. My God! What does it say? Clara asked. Alexander looked at her. My wife knew someone in this house would try to divide us. The revelation settled over them like winter frost. But there was more. At the bottom of the letter was a name. Lady Beatrice. Clara felt the room tilt beneath her. Yet before Alexander could speak, Edmund whispered, there is another page. He unfolded it. Clara read the final sentence. If the woman they bring into Ravensmere is ever accused of destroying this family, ask who benefits from her removal. Silence followed. Alexander slowly raised his eyes to Clara. Outside, thunder rolled beyond the dark gardens. For the first time, neither of them wondered whether Clara belonged in Ravensmere. They wondered whether someone had arranged her arrival for reasons far more dangerous than marriage. And Clara understood that the woman who had called her Barren might be only one piece of a much larger design. The letter lay open upon Alexander's desk, its final warning written in the late Duchess's unmistakable hand. Clara stood opposite him while rain traced silver paths down the conservatory windows. Neither spoke for several moments. The discovery had transformed suspicion into something far more dangerous, certainty. We cannot confront Beatrice without proof, Alexander said. Clara folded her hands. Then we shall find it. He looked at her with reluctant admiration. You speak as though you have already decided to stay. I have. Even knowing someone may have arranged your arrival. Clara's gaze did not waver. I was sent away once because my family decided I was useless. I will not be sent away again because another person finds me inconvenient. Something in Alexander's face softened. You should not have had to become this strong. No woman should, she replied. But strength is often what remains after everyone else has taken what they thought they were entitled to. He moved toward the window. Then we investigate quietly. By morning, the household seemed unchanged, yet Clara noticed everything differently. Servants lowered their voices when Beatrice entered a room. Letters disappeared from Alexander's study. Documents were moved without explanation. Even the children seemed unsettled. Edmund approached Clara first. Father says I must not involve myself. Your father is trying to protect you. He thinks being 17 means I am still a boy. Clara smiled faintly. Perhaps he forgets that 17 can feel very old when one is carrying responsibilities meant for a man. Edmund looked at her carefully. You understand. I understand more than I wish I did. He hesitated before revealing that he had seen Lady Beatrice entering the old study 2 nights earlier. She carried a key, he whispered. Clara's heart quickened. What sort of key? The brass one. Mother's desk. That afternoon, Clara found Arthur repairing a broken wooden music box. Why do you keep fixing things no one asks you to repair? She asked. Because people throw away damaged things. The answer struck her with painful familiarity. Not everything broken should be discarded. Arthur looked at her. Like you? Clara's breath caught. Who told you that word? No one. I heard the servants. She knelt beside him. Arthur, being called something does not make it true. He lowered his eyes. Will you leave like the others? Clara swallowed. No. Not unless I choose to. That evening, Alexander found her in the library. You have been speaking to the children. I have. And they trust you. Somewhat. He studied her. They did not trust their last governess. Because she tried to replace their mother. My wife would have liked you. Clara looked down. That is a dangerous kindness to offer a woman. Why? Because I may begin wanting it. Silence settled between them. Alexander stepped closer. I have already begun wanting something. Her heart beat painfully. What? You. The word was barely above a whisper. Clara looked at him, stunned. He did not touch her. I know what society will say, he continued. They will say I chose you because you cannot give me another heir. They will say you chose me because I am wealthy. They will invent every reason except the truth. And what is the truth? I do not know when it happened. Perhaps when you refused to pity yourself. Perhaps when Rose gave you that ribbon. Perhaps when I watched you stand alone in that ballroom and realized I wanted the whole room to regret hurting you. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I am afraid. So am I. That confession made her smile. Then footsteps sounded outside. They separated immediately. Edmund entered carrying a small iron box. I found this beneath the floorboard in Mother's study. Alexander opened it. Inside were account ledgers, sealed correspondence, and a second copy of the inheritance trust. Clara leaned closer. The original document named Alexander as sole guardian of the 5 children. The altered version transferred authority to Beatrice. But beneath it lay one more paper. Alexander read it and went completely still. What is it? Clara asked. He handed it to her. It was a private agreement signed years earlier between Beatrice and a London solicitor. If Alexander died without a new heir, Beatrice would gain control of the estate until the eldest child reached 25. Clara stared at the signature. This is why she needs you unmarried. Alexander shook his head. No. It is why she needs me distracted. A floorboard creaked in the corridor. Everyone turned. A shadow moved beneath the library door. Alexander opened it sharply, but the corridor was empty. On the carpet lay a single white glove. Clara recognized it immediately. Beatrice had worn a matching pair that evening. But before Alexander could speak, Rose appeared at the end of the hall, trembling. Papa, she whispered, Aunt Beatrice told me something. Alexander hurried toward her. What did she say? Rose clutched Clara's blue ribbon. She said if Clara stays, something terrible will happen to all of us. The words chilled the room. Clara knelt before the child. Rose, did she tell you why? Rose nodded. She said you would make Papa forget Mama. Alexander closed his eyes. Then Rose added the words that shattered his remaining doubt. She also said Mama never wanted you to come here. Clara slowly rose. 4 years, she had been told she was unwanted. Now someone inside Ravensmere was using that same wound against her. Alexander took Clara's hand before she could retreat. This time, he said, you will not face it alone. Clara heard the lock click and felt an instinct rise within her. Flee before rejection became another humiliation. But she remained still. Alexander's hand tightened around hers, not possessive, but steady. For the first time, she understood that belonging was not something a family granted. It was something 2 hearts could defend together, even when the doors around them were closing. And from the darkness beyond the library, someone quietly turned the key in the door. The key turned once, then again, and the library door opened. Lady Beatrice stood beyond it, composed beneath the gaslight, her white glove resting against the brass handle. She looked from Alexander to Clara, then to Edmund. She had expected this moment for years. "How dramatic," she said. Alexander stepped forward. "Give me the key." Beatrice smiled. "I wondered when you would finally ask." Clara watched her carefully. There was no panic in Beatrice's expression, only resignation. "You concealed my wife's letter," Alexander said. "I protected this family. You altered my children's trust. I preserved their future. You lied to me." Beatrice's eyes hardened. "And what have you done, Alexander? You buried yourself in grief, neglected the estate, and allowed 5 children to grow up frightened of losing you. I did what you were too broken to do." Edmund stepped forward. "You tried to take our home." Beatrice looked at him. "No. I tried to prevent your father from giving it away." Her gaze shifted to Clara. "She is the danger." Clara felt the old accusation strike its familiar place, but this time it found no weakness there. "No," Clara said quietly. "I am merely the woman you needed everyone to blame." Beatrice's composure faltered. Alexander turned toward the writing desk. "The solicitor's agreement is here. The ledgers are here. Your correspondence is here. You have no defense left." Beatrice stared at the papers. Then she laughed bitterly. "You think documents will erase what this family has become? They will reveal what you made it become." For the first time, Beatrice looked tired rather than powerful. "I watched your mother die," she told Edmund. "I watched your father disappear inside his own grief. Someone had to hold Ravensmere together. And you decided it belonged to you," Alexander said. "I decided someone had to choose." "No," Clara answered. "You decided no one else deserved the choice." The words landed heavily. Beatrice looked at her with something resembling hatred, but beneath it Clara glimpsed another emotion, fear. Alexander summoned the solicitor the following morning. By noon, every document had been examined. The original trust was restored. Beatrice's agreement was declared fraudulent. The altered papers were removed from the estate records, and her authority over the household ended. Yet Alexander did not humiliate her. He simply said, "You will leave Ravensmere with dignity because I refuse to let your cruelty turn me into a cruel man." Beatrice lowered her eyes. When the carriage carrying her disappeared beyond the gates, Alexander returned to the hall. The children watched silently, sensing the old order had ended. The 5 children waited there. No one spoke. Then Rose ran toward Clara. She wrapped both arms around Clara's waist and pressed her face against her gown. "Please stay." Clara closed her eyes. "I am not going anywhere." Edmund approached next. "I was wrong about you." Clara smiled. "You were frightened. There is a difference." Arthur looked embarrassed. "I suppose you may remain." Thomas whispered, "That means he likes you." Arthur elbowed him. Henry finally smiled. Alexander watched his children gather around Clara, and something inside him seemed to loosen. He approached her slowly. "I have spent years believing that protecting my children meant preventing anything from changing." Clara met his eyes. "Change is not always loss." "No," he said. "Sometimes it is the beginning of a life you were too afraid to imagine." He took her hand. This time, he did not hesitate. "I love you, Clara." She closed her fingers around his. "I love you too." Their wedding was held weeks later, quietly, without the grand spectacle London expected. The 5 children stood beside them, each carrying a small piece of the late Duchess's restored conservatory. After the ceremony, Rose led Clara through the garden. The abandoned glasshouse had been transformed. Edmund had repaired the windows. Arthur had restored the shelves. Thomas had planted roses. Henry had painted the benches. Rose had placed her mother's old blue ribbon inside a silver frame. Clara stopped before it. "What is this?" Rose smiled. "Mama's place is still here." She pointed toward the empty space beside it. "Now yours is too." Clara could not speak. Alexander came to stand beside her. "I have another gift." He handed her a set of keys. "To what?" "The old schoolhouse." Clara looked surprised. "I want Ravensmere to open it to girls who have nowhere else to go. You understand what it means to be told you are unwanted. I want no child in our county to grow up believing that." Tears filled her eyes. "You planned this?" "With the children." Edmund smiled. "We voted." Arthur added, "Rose was impossible." Rose frowned. "I was correct." Clara laughed through her tears. Years later, people remembered the schoolhouse, the restored conservatory, and the 5 children who became devoted to their new Duchess. But Clara remembered something simpler. She remembered the rainy evening when her family had taken her pearls and sent her away. She remembered believing an empty cradle meant an empty future. She remembered the Duke who looked at her and saw neither defect nor disgrace. She had not become worthy because she married a duke. She had not become valuable because 5 children loved her. She had been worthy before anyone recognized it. One spring morning, Clara stood beneath the flowering roses while Alexander watched their children race across the lawn. "Do you ever think about that first night?" he asked. "Sometimes. Do you regret coming with me?" She looked at him, smiling. "Never." He kissed her forehead. Beyond them, 5 voices rose together in laughter. And Clara understood the truth her family had never known. Motherhood was not always something given by blood. Sometimes it was built through patience, courage, forgiveness, and choice. The woman once cast out as barren had not been left with an empty life. She had found a home large enough for every part of her heart. And beneath the old conservatory glass, where sorrow had once gathered like winter, love finally had room to grow. Years later, Clara would sometimes remember the evening her family cast her out and called her barren. They had mistaken the absence of a child for the absence of worth. But life proved them wrong. She became the woman who gave 5 grieving children a home filled with love, and the Duchess who helped other forgotten children find hope. Alexander had not chosen her because she could give him an heir. He had chosen her because he saw the strength, compassion, and goodness that others were too blind to recognize. And that is the lesson Clara's story leaves behind. Never allow society's judgment to define your value. Your worth is not measured by what you produce, what you possess, or what others expect from you. Sometimes, the people who reject you simply cannot see the beautiful life waiting beyond their judgment. So if Clara's journey touched your heart, like this story, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, leave a comment with what you learned from Clara's journey, and follow for more emotional Victorian love stories. Because sometimes, the life you think has ended is only the beginning of the life you were always meant to live.